The first one is the magic question. What is that?
The magic question is just what would it take? And if you, listener, took away just one thing from this episode, go out and practice the magic question and just start asking people, what would it take? It shifts the dynamic to collaborative problem solving. And one of the many wonderful outcomes that I've seen from this question is from a design director at the New York Times who had a series of these conversations and got the New York Times to become the first media company to cover their employees getting to freeze their eggs or sperm and take control of their reproductive destiny. So what would it take? Can get your kids to clean their room, can get your employer to change a policy, and the possibilities are endless.
What makes someone remarkable? Is the college application process fair?
Do you mind being described as the white people whisperer?
What is the optimal age to get married?
You start to find the non-obvious way kind of works.
Is there like a cartoonist community?
That year was the first year that we ever heard a teacher talk about race.
So many times when we go live with these things, it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom.
Boom.
Welcome back to the Non-Obvious Book Review. I am your host, Rohit Bhargava, and I have a very special guest with me today, Zoe Chance, who is a legend in the world of influence. She teaches the most popular course on influence and persuasion at Yale's Business School, and she has written a fantastic book called Influence is Your Superpower. Welcome to the show, Zoe.
Thank you for inviting me, Rohit.
That's a tongue twister. So I messed it up right from the beginning, but you know what? It'll get better. Don't worry. One thing that I wanted to start with is you write that the secret to being influential is being influenceable, as in other people can influence you. Talk a little bit about why that was one of the first points that you made in the book.
When you think about people who are trying to influence you, if you find that somebody is just barreling forward and trying to force you to do something, you feel very resistant. And whatever it is that they have to offer or suggest, you really want to say no to them. And it gets your hackles up and your inner 2-year-old is like, you're not the boss of me. You don't tell me what to do. And so that's the kind of resistance that you're facing if you don't allow other people to be influencing you. You're refusing a collaboration. But if you are trying to influence other people in a collaborative way that allows them freedom of choice and acknowledges that they know things that you don't know, if you yourself are influenceable, other people will be more willing to be influenced by you.
It strikes me throughout the book that there's so many wonderful examples of things that seem to have come from experiments that you did, either with your students, maybe on your students, not in a bad way, but are you an experimental person?
Personally, yes. Professionally, yes. My background is in behavioral science. And so I've been running experiments in labs, in the real world, surveys for over a decade, 10 or 15 years at this point. And then a lot of the work that we do in class are real life challenges that are informal sorts of experiments. What I find is that people learn best and most when they're experimenting in their own life. So those are the ones that count the most.
And you're teaching what I would assume to be pretty high achievers. I mean, they're in a master's level program at Yale. And one of the things that you talk about in the book is how facts are not as persuasive as we think they are. Do you still encounter students who come in saying, look, I'm just going to give you the facts and the bullet points and that'll convince you?
All the time, Rohit. And this is not just at Yale and with graduate students, but so many people in my life who are trying to influence me or asking for my help to influence someone else, especially when we have smart, kind people who are trying to influence smart, kind people. There's this tendency to say, I don't want to pressure you, so I'll just give you the facts. Here's the facts, here's the data. But facts and data are not influential. That is not the right way to start. Facts and data are helpful to allow someone to persuade themselves of what they already wanted to do or what they already wanted to believe. And those facts and data can support that hypothesis. But when you just jump there, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And just as you said, this is especially for high achievers.
In my world of marketing and persuasion, there's a lot of talk about storytelling, and everything needs to be a story. And sometimes I've noticed that when you put that in front of someone who doesn't naturally think of themselves as a storyteller, it feels kind of intimidating. Where do you land on how important storytelling is to get over this idea of just facts, facts, facts?
Storytelling is one of the many paths to influencing somebody in a more visceral way. What we want to have before we give the facts, facts, facts is that either it's very easy for them to do this thing that we're offering, or it's very desirable for them to say yes or take action or believe the thing we want to believe. And storytelling can build emotional engagement, right? So it can be helpful in this way, but it can also be really annoying. It's not always appropriate. Like, you can't say, if you are a junior employee, make an appointment with the CEO and go in and launch into this 15-minute story where the CEO doesn't know where you're going. Like, it's very not cool, right?
Right.
And there are a lot of people who overtell stories where we're just like, okay, get to the point. And especially people with power kind of abuse their position and the airwaves and take up too much space with stories. But stories are one way to get emotional engagement. Emotional engagement is one way to be more persuasive. So this is where this comes from. If you are listening and you're someone who is not excited about telling stories, that is absolutely fine. You do not have to be an expert storyteller to be influential.
I feel like there's a self-help book that's needed there called Overtelling, where it's like overdoing storytelling and how we can avoid that. Because you're right, I do see that myself sometimes, and it's the worst, sitting through somebody's long-winded story to get to a point when they're obviously trying to persuade you to do something.
Right, right. And what we do need to be able to cultivate as a communication skill is to be able to share concrete information. Like, you want to have people be able to visualize some concrete example that you're talking about, but that doesn't have to be a story. You don't have to create an emotional journey through this story. We just need to be able to give a concrete example, like you are able to do. Like, Rohit, I love your newsletter so much. I have only a couple of newsletters that I actually haven't sent to spam and I actually read every time they come out. And yours is one of them, because you find every single week these crazy, concrete, so engaging examples of interesting things going on in the world. So sometimes they're stories, sometimes they're not. It's not important that they're stories. So I know you know exactly what I'm talking about. Can I ask you, while we're talking about this, is there a favorite non-obvious insight from the recent work that you've done that sticks in your mind?
Oh my gosh, there's, every week, you're right, I find so many stories of just like fascinating things, and it's like they all combine for me in some ways, because I'm constantly looking for like the new story, the latest thing that somebody's done. And then people send me back emails. Like, there was a story, to answer your question, there was a story about Italy banning the use of other languages in official documentation. And my immediate response, to my gut reaction to that, right, was, oh, that's so xenophobic. And they're trying to shut down progress. But then I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, what if they're actually right? What if their perspective could save the Italian language and avoid everything becoming English, which I think is also kind of a world that most people don't want. Maybe English speakers are like, that's great, but everybody else kind of wants some cultural diversity in the world, I would think. And so when I wrote about the story, I didn't write from the perspective of, isn't this a crazy thing? I said, I wonder if it'll work. And the responses I got to that were so interesting, because I got people passionate on both sides, thinking it was a brilliant idea, thinking it was a terrible idea. And I don't know that I would have gotten that feedback if I just came in and wrote about it as this crazy thing that Italy's doing. So I'm constantly learning when I'm writing about these things that if I take a perspective on one side, sometimes people might disagree with me, but if I take the perspective of, isn't this interesting? What do you think? I'll learn something by doing that.
And that's a great example of the non-obvious approach.
I mean, it's a constant reminder too. And I love that for you, your background leading you to do this is really quite fascinating as well. I mean, you studied acting for some time, and then you were going off and selling, I think, magazines for some time, and then you led Barbie, and that's kind of having a moment right now because the new Barbie movie is about to come out, and you were part of the marketing team for that. How did that background prepare you for doing this work of teaching people how to be influential now?
I think what really prepared me was the feeling of being so shy and uninfluential. And that's what led me to study acting and theater. And then those skills led me to sales and success in that way, and marketing. But I really was just such a shy nerd that I needed to actually intentionally and consciously study how to relate to people and how to communicate with people because I was so bad at it. And being really bad at something can be a gift in the way that when you have studied it consciously, you can be a better teacher. So if I had just been charismatic and popular and super engaging as I popped out of the womb, I could have been very successful, but I wouldn't have known how to teach people how to influence other people.
Let's dig into charisma a little bit because you talk about it and you talk about some myths associated with charisma that oftentimes people believe. So what are those myths and how did you start teaching people to overcome them?
I think the biggest myth of charisma is that it's something that you're born with and that it's something that you are rather than something that you do. And if you'll indulge me in a little story to make this concrete for people who are listening, I think this is a great example. And this is an example of Prince. And I've been a fan of Prince since I was a small child. I finally, as an adult, got to go and see Prince in concert at this club in Las Vegas that he owned. And this has been a couple of decades at least in the making. I'm standing there, I'm waiting for Prince to come on stage. It's hot, it's dark, we're all sweaty, we're agitated, emotions are high. He comes onto the stage lights come up, he takes the microphone and he looks straight into my eyes, I am sure, and he says, "Are we alone?" And I lose my breath and I turn to my friend standing next to me. I touch his arm and I say, "Oh my God, I think I'm going to faint." And then the stranger next to me on the other side collapses in a dead faint. And the paramedics come in and they're loading her onto a stretcher. And I say, "Oh my God, has this ever happened before?" They say it's not the first time. It was this electric, laser focused charisma. I don't know whether Prince was looking at me or at her or at somebody completely different, but we felt it so strongly that it was overpowering, enough to lose consciousness. Prince is the most charismatic person I've ever shared a room with, but Prince didn't start that way. In fact, he was exactly the opposite. He was a brilliant musician. He practiced hours and hours and hours, at least 8 hours a day. He played 5 different instruments. So talented, but so shy that when Warner Brothers came and scouted him as a musician, even though they signed him, when they signed him, they said, "You can never go on tour." Because while he was playing for Warner Brothers, he's slowly turning his back until he's facing the back of the stage and he can't even speak above a whisper. So he actually got a #1 hit on the Billboard charts. It was "I Want to Be Your Lover." And still Warner Brothers was saying, "You are never going on the road." When Rick James invited him, he's on his Super Freak tour and he says, "Listen, Prince, would you like to open for me on the road?" Prince is so excited. He says yes. And he sucks. Prince still sucks as a performer. And it doesn't help that he's way beyond, like, very ahead of his time and he's wearing women's underwear and things like that. He's getting booed off of the stage. But on that Super Freak tour, he is watching and copying what Rick James does to interact with the audience and to do charisma. By the end of the tour, Prince is getting standing ovations, and Rick James, according to Rick James, is jealous. So this is the development of charisma. And I'm not saying we're all going to be able to make people lose consciousness with our incredible Prince charisma, nor am I saying that we should wear, lingerie on stage. But this is how charisma can be practiced, developed, and that it's really an action rather than a way of being.
I love that because it signals to all of us that even if you do happen to have some charisma or you feel like you don't, the idea of practicing something that seems intangible is a really important lesson, right? Because it says to us that even if it doesn't feel within your grasp, or even if you don't think it's particularly a strength for you, it could be, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have coached so many people who are uncomfortable about public speaking to connect with a room of people within 5 minutes. And you can feel the electricity. And it's really, really simple. And anyone who wants to practice this in a group, it is so powerful that you can do this and you can experience it, even if this person is speaking a different language. So you talked about Italian and language gating. I can have somebody who is speaking any language that they're fluent in, telling a story that they are practiced enough in that they don't have to be thinking hard to remember it. And the secret to charisma is really just connecting with people one-on-one and not shifting your focus until you've connected with someone. And then you shift to the next person. And this is how you connect with a room of people, is one by one. And the way when we practice this as an exercise that you know that you've connected with someone is that everybody in the room has their hand up. And when they feel you connect with them, they put their hand down. Whether you were looking at them, whether you were connecting with someone
exercise
across the room. And in a room of, say, 50 people, it takes approximately 5 minutes for someone who is not a comfortable public speaker to connect with the entire room of 50 people. So you can just imagine in a situation where you actually get to practice and you get more comfortable, you can have speakers like, professional speakers like us connecting with rooms of thousands.
I can sort of feel someone wondering in their head, how do you hit the balance between eye contact and creepy staring?
This is a good question. And when we're talking about speaking to a room of people, typically it's about one sentence. So if it's not a run-on sentence, typically you can do this by connecting for someone with one sentence. And if we're talking about just regular conversation, not on stage, typically it's about one breath or so. You definitely wouldn't want to hold eye contact for an entire minute. However, if you want to do an exercise in listening, and this is another influence skill that I teach that's of top importance, we'll practice different styles of listening. And you're listening for a minute and then talking for a minute in different ways. But at the end, we do 1 minute where both people and two partners are listening to each other. Simultaneous listening. So nobody's speaking. And there's just eye contact for 1 minute. And you get an incredible amount of
1 minute's a long time for just eye contact.
It's a very long time. Yeah. Research studies that have done this will have people listen for 4 minutes. And a lot of people burst into tears with that length of listen. In a good way. Bursting into tears in a good way.
Hopefully in a good way.
Hopefully in a good way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And even just the point that you made about different types of listening. I think that sometimes people don't necessarily appreciate that there are different forms of listening. There's active listening. I think you write about deep listening. And knowing when to practice each one in a situation where you are in a conversation versus this situation where it's an interview versus a negotiation. And you talk a lot about negotiations in the book. And one of the things that you make as a point early on is that negotiation to a lot of people feels like getting ready for battle. Like, I want something, they want something that's different, and we're going to fight it out basically and see who wins, and I'm going to win this negotiation. And that's one of the first perspectives that you challenge when you write about negotiation, saying instead that it should be more of a collaboration. How do you turn a negotiation where you maybe are thinking, okay, I want this to be a collaboration, but somebody else might be walking in saying, all right, I'm ready for battle, let's go. How do you turn that situation into a collaboration?
So, first of all, a lot of people have the expectation that they're going to be in that situation, that either you're going to be a bully or you're going to be a sucker, and that other people are going to try to get everything that they can from them, and that has us walk in a defensive way. When I ask people which is more desirable for you, you want to get everything that you can, or you want to just not be a sucker. 4 out of 5 people say, I really just want to not be a sucker. Yeah. So that's most of the people you're negotiating with. They really just don't want to be a sucker. So a lot of people, because they think you might be a bully, could come in posturing to try to not be a sucker, right? In a defensive way. So we can just say from the outset, what I would like to figure out with you is that we walk away with a deal that we're both happy with. And just a statement like that, just letting them know, I actually care that you are happy about this as well as me. And you're letting them know, I'm not going to try to get everything that I can from you. Great. So super simple. When you have somebody who really is just trying to get everything that they can from you, you're not going to change that person. You're not going to change that person. So I teach a lot of collaborative negotiation strategies, but when you have somebody who really is a bully, they're not going to collaborate with you. And then you just need to be very clear about your boundaries, what it is that you want and what it is that you're willing to accept. And you just lay it out very clearly. And that's one of the few situations where you do need to be willing to walk away. And it is very often a good idea to walk away from bullies, because a negotiation is usually just the beginning of, you agree to something that then happens.
Yeah.
Right?
So you have to work with that person.
That's right. I don't want to be negotiating with bullies because I don't want to be collaborating with bullies. There's some situations where I have to.
Yeah.
There's some, ongoing relationships that I can't get out of with people who are bullies. And then I just have to be really clear about what I want, what I'm willing to say yes to. I will get other people to help me maybe behind the scenes in an ongoing relationship with a bully. But yeah, I'm just very clear about drawing my own boundaries.
Well, we're going to talk about some of the methods that you have for that, because you have some really great tips in there. But before we leave the topic of negotiation, one of the things that stood out for me in the book is you have an entire chapter titled Negotiating While Female. So let's dig into that a little bit. Like, what is the difference when you're negotiating and you're female?
Thank you for asking. And thank you for being such a great ally to women and really all groups of people who have less power or privilege. There's a lot that we have in common in different situations where either we really have less power or privilege, or we feel like we have less power or privilege. And so in this respect, a lot of gender differences can be applied to race differences or socioeconomic differences, sexual preference differences, and things like that. But there are a few things that are specific gender differences. And one of those gender differences is in the way that girls and boys have been socialized. This leads to differences in the ways men and women work with each other. So just average differences, not saying for you who are listening that this is true of you or any other particular woman or man or non-binary person. But what happens a lot with girls playing with each other is that they tend to socialize one-on-one with one friend. And spending a lot more time in this way than how boys socialize, which tends to be more time in groups. And we're not talking about anything to do with bias or power or privilege, but kids who tended to socialize more one-on-one ended up developing more listening skills and ended up developing more skills to relate to someone and intuit what that person might want or need. And we developed more skills for having other people like us, because if you have only one friend in this moment and that person doesn't like you, then you have no friends. So girls are developing more skills to become likable. They're developing more listening skills, but they are not developing a lot of skills for advocating for themselves. And they're not developing a lot of skills for dealing with situations where somebody doesn't like them, right?
Right.
Boys, on the other hand, or kids who've socialized in groups more, are learning that you don't have to have everybody like you. It's okay if there's some people who don't like you right now because you still have friends. And you really have to speak up and advocate for yourself, because you're in a group of people, it's easy to get ignored. So you just have to develop the skill for jumping in and interrupting people and things like this. And you also, in a group, need to become more comfortable in a hierarchy where somebody just ends up being de facto more of a leader at one time or another, and that's okay. That's not the end of the world. Girls are not as comfortable, if they've socialized in this way, they're not as comfortable in a hierarchy. So there are all of these differences in how kids practice socializing that then at work, what ends up happening is, for example, men tend to be more friendly and open about who's going to have lunch with them or each other. So a group of men will be going to lunch and it's fine for somebody to invite themselves or be invited. Women are not like this. Women are pickier about who they spend time with, and they end up spending more time with people socializing with people outside of work than socializing with people at work. I'm just really going off on a tangent here. Like you asked me
No,
about
it's totally, I mean, it's totally,
and I'm
totally
telling you about
related.
social dynamics, but this is an aspect that plays into behind the scenes all kinds of situations where, say, men will find out about opportunities that women don't find out about, or men will recommend each other for opportunities that women don't find out about because men have closer friends at work than women do. This is also why, for example, when the pandemic lockdown happened, men got lonely and women did not, because men lost their friends and women already didn't have their friends at work. And women, because they are more picky about the people that they socialize and they have fewer friends at work, also when they enter a negotiation, they're at a disadvantage because they don't have as much information as men do, and because they've had less practice advocating for themselves compared to men who've socialized over decades to be more comfortable advocating for themselves. So women feel less comfortable, ask for less, ask less often, don't know as much as men do. But a lot of studies have shown that when women ask for as much as men do in a specific context, they tend to get as much as men do.
Yeah, you had a really fascinating example where you were talking about, I think, some students in one of your classes, and you had this experiment where you had $20 and you said, I'll give you $20. You just have to convince me that I should give it to you. And your point in that example was somebody came up with a really interesting reason why they would need the $20 and how they would use it, but they never actually asked for it. And the point I recall of that whole chapter was you have to ask. You have to actually ask the question. And it seemed totally, for a show about non-obvious ideas, it seemed totally obvious. But as I thought about it, I was like, people probably do forget to ask. I mean, it's a classic sales tactic to say you have to ask for the business. You can't just do the whole pitch and then be done. Like you have to say, we really want to work with you. Can we work with you? Like you have to ask for the business. Did that feel like a obvious thing for you? Or was it like, oh my God, I can't believe how many people just don't do that. I need to write about this.
It is both obvious and non-obvious. And thank you for seeing that in there, because I'm embarrassed sometimes to be a Yale professor teaching classes and workshops with, people who've flown in from all over the world. And like, here you are at this Ivy League institution, your professor is teaching you to just ask. It seems very obvious. But there are a lot of layers that are not obvious and really important. And one of them is that we start by not even having any concept of what we're not asking for because it didn't occur to us. And to
It's a blind
illustrate
spot.
What?
It's a blind spot.
Yeah, it's a huge blind spot. And to illustrate this, one of the challenges that we do, game that we play in my MBA class, is called Bigger and Better, where you start with something small. We start with a paperclip, and then you trade it up for something bigger and better. And the reason that I have students practice this is that it's very hard to ask for something that is more than you can offer in exchange. So it's scary to say, will you give me something bigger and better than this thing I have to offer you? You trade up as many times as you want with whoever is willing to trade with you. And the biggest and best thing that has ever happened in this exercise is a couple of students, Manus and Tom, came back the next week to class. Everybody brings their biggest, best thing. And Manus and Tom say, Zoe, we couldn't fit it in the classroom. So do you mind bringing the class outside to the front of the building? So we go outside, and there in the turnaround is a Volkswagen Jetta that says Bigger and Better scrawled across the windshield. They've made 10 trades in 3.5 days with business owners in our hometown. And they have traded up from a paperclip to a car by literally just asking. And then it's beautiful. They donate the car to a refugee family from Afghanistan. The mom has been commuting 2 hours each way on the bus. And the person who donated the car was the very first car dealer they called. They traded up from a painting that I thought was really ugly. Apparently it was valuable, but she didn't care about the painting.
Right.
She's so happy to be able to give away the car and participate in this exciting group endeavor. So there's no way for you to know right now, even for you, Rohit, or for me. I think that generally we're pretty good at imagining things and we're pretty good at asking things. But even for us, there are an infinite number of greater, grander, more wonderful things for us in the world around us that we're not even thinking about. That's the beginning of just asking.
Yeah, the book is filled with advice like that. And what I love about that story, and also the way that you've launched the book, is that there's a purpose behind it as well. You've decided to donate half of your profits to charity from the book itself. You're obviously teaching that to your students in terms of, don't just get a car for yourself out of this exercise, like get a car and donate it to somebody who could really use it. The book has a lot of techniques that could be used for really making society and the world better, as well as advancing your career. It could also be used by, people who might misuse it. And I think we've seen a history with some business books where the secrets are revealed and then someone who we hope doesn't use those secrets does. And you do talk about the kind of dark arts of influence and persuasion and how to avoid getting conned, how to avoid being a sucker. But do you worry at all when you wrote the book about what if this gets into the hands of somebody who's going to take these amazing powers and use them to manipulate people?
I have thought about that a lot, and I wouldn't be so egotistical as to imagine that I hold these secrets that can only be revealed by me teaching influence to the world, and then these bad actors will get a hold of them. But there are so many books and courses that people can read, videos they can watch about transactional influence techniques. What I'm focusing on is, what are influence techniques and strategies that can feel comfortable for you and for the other person? I'm writing for people who don't want to make others uncomfortable. And that's why we hold ourselves back from being as influential as we could. So, is some bad actor going to read my chapter on the dark arts and go, aha, that's the recipe for manipulative influence, and I'm going to do all of those things? It's possible, But it's also very likely that that person has been reading all of the books out there about transactional influence that already exist. So I'm not revealing something in that chapter that they wouldn't have known about. And I do, though, think that this is what happened with this book. You've probably read it, but I don't know how many listeners have. Millions of people have read Bob Cialdini's book called Influence.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a seminal work in the field. I'm a huge admirer of Robert Cialdini. He's a just icon of mine. And this is how I got into the whole field and why I left industry. I read this book. I loved it. I wanted to do this research and this work.
And he
yet,
gave you a back cover endorsement too, right?
He
so
did,
that's really,
yes.
that's fantastic.
Yeah, he's been so kind to me as I've entered this field and been working in it and writing in it. He's a wonderful person. He wrote this book for people to recognize these strategies and be able to defend themselves against them. But his book has been used as the Bible for transactional sales. He wrote it in the 1980s, and so much of what's written in transactional sales is going back to Bob Cialdini's 6 principles of influence. So what I've been trying to do in my work is say, these are some techniques and strategies that will feel comfortable now, and you will be able to use these strategies repeatedly without having other people feel manipulated. And it's going to be totally clear what you're doing. You're not secretly influencing people in ways that they didn't know, but they know that here's what you would like. Generally, they know that this is how you're trying to influence them and that you're respecting that they get to make their own decision. So in the long run, this type of two-way respectful influence is more effective than these transactional influence techniques that might be helpful when, you have some job like I used to have, like doing telemarketing or door-to-door sales or something like that.
I could learn so much more from you as we keep this going, and you've talked about techniques. So the place I'd love to close with is a little bit of a round robin we're going to do. So you have some very specific techniques that you talk about in the book. So I want to name a few of them, and I want you to just explain to our watchers what that is and how they can use it. And the first one is the magic question.
Quick.
Okay, awesome. The first one is the magic question. What is that?
The magic question is just, what would it take? And if you, listener, took away just one thing from this episode, go out and practice the magic question and just start asking people, what would it take? It shifts the dynamic to collaborative problem solving. And one of the many wonderful outcomes that I've seen from this question is from a design director at the New York Times who had a series of these conversations and got the New York Times to become the first media company to cover their employees getting to freeze their eggs or sperm and take control of their reproductive destiny. So what would it take? Can get your kids to clean their room, can get your employer to change a policy, and the possibilities are endless.
Excellent. The second one is the no challenge.
All right. If what would it take didn't strike your fancy, this is the second challenge that I would offer to you. Number 2 priority, and it's really fun and it's a little scary and it's very developmental. For 24 hours, you say no to each person who asks you or invites you to do something. And you don't ruin your life. So whatever it takes, do not ruin your life. And you can change your mind, just like everybody can change their mind. What happens is that as you get more comfortable saying no, you get more comfortable with other people saying no to you. And because you're more comfortable with the idea of them saying no to you, when you are asking them to do something, you're putting less pressure on them. They feel more comfortable. They feel able to say no, and that leaves them more inclined to say yes. So this non-obvious path to them saying yes starts with you saying no.
I am glad you were not in the midst of the no challenge when I invited you onto the show. Otherwise, that would have been a tragedy for me. Maybe you would have changed your mind the day later, but maybe not. So,
I would have.
Well, thank you. Well, the last one that I'll ask you about is the kindly brontosaur.
The kindly brontosaurus is the second favorite influence technique that I teach after the magic question. And the kindly brontosaurus is something people love because it is so easy. And it is just expressing your desire or making your request, and then, like a gentle, very, very tall dinosaur, you keep physically or metaphorically in view, and you're not going away. And you're just checking in. There's no pressure, no pressure. And I have seen this technique succeed in all kinds of situations where I didn't expect people to be successful at all. And in the book, I mention one of them where somebody got a company car from a company as a junior manager, company car from a company that was absolutely not supposed to give it to him.
Yeah, you also talked about getting a seat on a sold out flight just by standing by and being around,
That's
which I
an
think is
easy one.
immediately applicable for anybody who's had
That
to
is
go
an
stand
easy
by.
one. Yes.
Excellent.
Standing
Well,
by, literally.
yeah, exactly. Well, this was a fantastic conversation. The book, again, is Influence is Your Superpower. I'm talking with Zoe Chance, who is a professor of influence and persuasion and is a fantastic author and just a wonderful resource. I want to thank you for joining me on the Non-Obvious Book Review.
Thank you so much. It's absolutely an honor and a pleasure anytime I get to talk to you.
Thank you.